the French Revolution. And this is Revelation 16. This is where modern history begins. And of course it goes right through to the return of the Lord Jesus Christ and the Battle of Armageddon. And you can see that there. And of course beyond, we read those last verses there about the seventh angel in verse 17. And of course from the sixth vial, which begins around about 1820 when the Turkish reign over many parts of the eastern Mediterranean, in fact northern Mediterranean, all that territory began to dry up, and of course down through Africa and parts of Arabia as well. All that began to dry up. And we know that that leads us to Daniel chapter 11, when the king of the south pushes against the king of the north and pushes the Turkish Empire out of the Holy Land in 1917. That's part of what we're going to be talking about on Saturday, just a little advert. Okay. But here we have the beginning of modern history with the French Revolution, which is the first vial, and then we have Napoleon coming into the picture. Now, tonight we're going to be concentrating on the second to the fifth vials, which is the time of Napoleon, and the tremendous upheaval following the French Revolution when Napoleon militarized the effect of the French Revolution and ultimately brought about the great decline of Rome, the decline of the Papacy. In fact, he put two of the popes in prison during his reign, and the Catholic Church began its great fall, the fall of Rome. Now, we know it's ultimately going to be destroyed in Revelation 17 after the Lord Jesus Christ returns. But this is the decline of the temporal power of the church, which gave the opportunity, together with the decline of the Turkish Empire, gave the opportunity for the truth to be revived, for the things that we now believe were enshrouded, clouded for 1,000 and so years under the Holy Roman Empire. You know, there was really no alternative to obeying the dictates of the church because they had a huge army in support of them. The Holy Roman Empire came to its end, really, when the Austrian Empire was overthrown by Napoleon. So we're going to be talking about those things and the opportunity for us to have the truth in these last days. For Brother Thomas was born in the time of Napoleon. Napoleon was still alive when Brother Thomas was born. And in that time, of course, the truth and more freedoms for religion came into being, and it gave opportunity for the truth to be rediscovered and brought again into the Western world. So those are the events that we're going to be looking at this evening. What's it got to do with Louisiana, you might ask? Good question. I hope that was enough of an incentive for you to come along and find out what Louisiana's got to do with it all. But we'll be talking about that to some extent tonight. So the first vial brings a noisome and a grievous sore upon the world as it was then known, of course, largely in Europe with the French Revolution. But it had its impacts in many other parts of the world too. In fact, it really had its impact in Australia as well. The French Revolution brought about many, many changes, which brought in what we know as, in inverted commas, democracy, the rule of the people, but many, many more freedoms that weren't available to people before the French Revolution, which included more freedoms in terms of worship and religion. The second vial, the sea becomes as a dead man, and Britain ultimately rules the waves, Trafalgar. And then the rivers and the fountains, the water become blood. That's Napoleon in his various battles throughout the Central European area. Then men are scorched with a great heat, which is Napoleon's wars with Austria, and ultimately the overthrow of the Holy Roman Empire centred in Austria in 1806. And then the beast kingdom becomes full of darkness as the Holy Roman Empire is actually dissolved. And then, of course, we won't be dealing with it specifically tonight, the drying up of the river Euphrates, the sending forth of the unclean spirits like frogs, which came out of the philosophies which were brought into being through the French Revolution, and the voices and thunders and the great earthquake of the judgments upon Babylon the Great. So that's a quick summary of the 7 vials. So the French Revolution is still regarded as the key to understanding our times. The cultures, the philosophies, the politics of our times all have their origins in the French Revolution. And modern history, as we said, begins in the French Revolution. The Larousse Encyclopedia of Modern History says that in a political sense, it's still proper, and it's still proper today, to date the age in which we live from the French Revolution. The shock carried by that revolution and the spread of its principles has produced repercussions ever since. And Winston Churchill was asked, what do you think was the effect of the French Revolution in the mid-1900s? And he says, well, it's too early to tell. Only 150 years had gone past. You couldn't really measure the full effect. So it really was a malignant ulcer which spread abroad through Europe. So verse 2 of Revelation 16, the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, that is the common peoples of Europe, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, of course, those who were associated with the Catholic system, and them that worshipped his image. The papacy was in control, absolutely, but this grievous sore caused tremendous upheaval against the church and against the monarchy, particularly in France, but had other effects in other monarchies in Europe as well. The revolutionary principles began to spread like a malignant ulcer throughout Catholic Europe, all through the Napoleonic Wars, which came immediately after the Revolution. And Churchill says the French Revolution was to spread out from Paris across the whole continent, gave rise to a generation of warfare, war after war after war. We remember that Brother Thomas went back to Britain in 1848 because so much was happening in Europe. There were still revolutions were continuing throughout Europe. That's why he went back there, and that's why he wrote Help Us Israel, because he had to leave something of what he was lecturing throughout Britain for the people to continue to read and study and understand what he'd been talking about through all those lectures. Sometimes thousands came to his lectures. Such was the tremendous interest in what was going to happen from there on after these great revolutions which were continuing at that time. The echoes reverberated long into the 19th century and afterwards into the 20th century and now into the 21st century. So as a summary, the French Revolution, this tremendously violent period saw the end of a long period of persecution and repression by the Roman Catholic Church, God's punishment inflicted on the church system and its hierarchy, the introduction of freedoms which would allow the rediscovery and the worldwide spread of the first century truth, and a greater tolerance for Jews. Napoleon was quite tolerant, in fact, favourable towards the Jewish people. And ultimately, and of course, Napoleon had actually envisaged a homeland for the Jews in Israel. Didn't come to pass in his time, as we know. It took 150 years after that. But this tremendous new approach to freedoms and freedom of religion and freedom of worship, and Napoleon certainly fostered that. So what we're going to be talking about really tonight is the influence of the angels in world affairs. We know that the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men. We know that Daniel said he sets up kings and he removes kings. He sets up the right leaders. He gets them from a very early age. God monitors and fosters the lives of rulers who he's going to use for his influence and for his power and control over the affairs of the nations. And we're going to be looking at a few individual men that were particularly raised up by God for certain circumstances at this time in history. Huge change, tremendous turbulence in the politics of the world. And among those was Napoleon himself. So remember the 14th of July, what's the holiday called? Bastille Day. Bastille Day, because the French Revolution really began, didn't it, at the storming of the Bastille, where the common people who were without armaments and without ammunition, decided to rise up against the monarchy and against the monarchy's army, and all the gunpowder, basically, was stored in the Bastille. And there were weapons there too. So they stormed the Bastille, which had been a prison for political prisoners earlier on. People like Voltaire had been imprisoned. The philosophers who were encouraging the people to rise up against their very much overlord and overbearing rulers, and the kings who'd taken all the money and spent it upon themselves and were taxing the people greater and greater. And ultimately, out of the turmoil that came from the French Revolution comes Napoleon. Napoleon rises to power during the period from the early 1790s, and in 1799 the coup d'etat brings him to power. So these are the three critical dates that we're going to be looking at tonight. They are the dates which saw a tremendous change in one day in each case. In one day. Huge change. First of all, the 30th of April, 1803, the Louisiana Purchase. What was that about? We'll talk about that in some detail. The Battle of Trafalgar, one day, in fact, one afternoon. In 1805, the Battle of Trafalgar took place. Huge change as a result of that. And then again, in a single day, on the 2nd of December, 1805, the Battle of Austerlitz, when Napoleon overthrew two other armies greater than his own, the Austrian army, the Russian army. In the Battle of Austerlitz, his greatest victory ever, which resulted in the fall of Rome. So there are three dates that we're going to be looking at. They spelt the end of the Roman system. How did it all come about? Well, the first key date has to do with the Louisiana Purchase. Anybody been to Louisiana? Yeah, been to Louisiana, New Orleans. Nice, interesting place. A lot of French influence in New Orleans. Of course, it's from Orléans in France, New Orleans, New South Wales, from South Wales, New South Wales, well, New Orleans. And it's amazing when you look back at the history of America, and a lot of us don't really know and understand the history of America and where it fits into the world. But, of course, America was where the American Indian tribes were there for centuries and centuries. But it was the age of exploration that took the Europeans to America. And in the age of exploration and colonisation, so many of the European powers, but there were four in particular, explored the world, and everywhere they went, for some reason, they felt they could put a flag up and claim the territory. So, of course, there were the British, and there were the French, and there were the Portuguese, and there were the Spanish. And now the Spanish mainly, and the Portuguese are in South America and in the Caribbean. And when Christopher Columbus first arrived, he actually arrived in the Caribbean and thought he'd hit the mainland of America, but that's beside the point. The exploration continued over a period of time, and the French came across, in particular, and came across through Canada and came down the Mississippi Basin. And an explorer named De La Salle said, I'm claiming this whole area for France. And King Louis deserves it to be named after him. So we'll call it Louisiana. And that's much bigger territory than Louisiana is today. But that was claimed by the French. Of course, the British had already had the Pilgrims come across in the eastern states. The Louisiana area claimed by the French was about 1/3 of the landmass of America. Spain had got right across to the other side, and the British had some toeholds in Canada. So this area is nominally owned by France. It's a big area. You can see the shaded area there. That's the Mississippi now. Is that an important river or what? You know, all the other streams that flow into it, the Missouri, the Arkansas, the Ohio, the Illinois, all flow into the Mississippi. That whole area is drained and comes down in through New Orleans. Now, that's tremendously fertile territory. It's not like Australia. You know, the explorers hoped they might find an inland sea in Australia. We haven't found it yet. We're all desert in the middle. The desert in America is further across on the western side, but all that is tremendously well-watered farmland and great production. Lots of things are grown there and are shipped down the river and were shipped across to Europe through the port of New Orleans. So port of New Orleans is very, very important. That whole area, as we said, the French owned it. And the British had settled across in some of those states on the far eastern side. So this is the timeline leading up to this great event, which we are known in history as the Louisiana Purchase. 1682, de La Salle, the French explorer, he claimed for France all the territory drained by the Mississippi River from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico, named it Louisiana after Louis XIV, who, of course, reigned about 70 years. He was the Sun King, well known, and a king that liked his luxury. And the real reason for the French Revolution, by the way, which came with Louis XVI, was that those kings of France had just gone crazy with their expenditure of the wealth that they had. Of course, the great Palace of Versailles, some may have seen the Palace of Versailles, you've certainly seen pictures of it, I'm sure. The extravagance was just ridiculous. And of course, the people are starving. But more than that, with this exploration, the kings were prepared to spend a lot of money to send people out to establish new parts of the world for their country, and of course to send armies with them to fight to maintain those territories, and that drained a lot of money from the economy of France. And as a result of that, the people are getting poorer and poorer. The kings and the nobles didn't pay taxes. The church owned much of the land. More than a third of the country was owned by the church. And the poor common people worked for the church, and the church didn't pay any taxes, but the workers paid the taxes. No wonder there was a revolution. The people were suppressed. So the port of New Orleans is founded, and that port, and through the area in the Caribbean, which we'll look at in a moment, exported a tremendous array of goods to Europe, from which France gained a lot of income, and became very reliant on the produce from that area of Louisiana and parts of the Caribbean. So that port is founded in 1718. Then there came what was called the 7 Years' War, also in America known as the French-Indian War, but it was a war which started in the area of America, but also spread to other parts of the world, between the British and the territories that they owned, and the French and the Spanish got involved as well. Ultimately, France is defeated in the 7 Year War, and they have to give up certain territory. They actually gave the area of New Orleans and Louisiana west of the Mississippi River to Spain, and the British got the part east of the Mississippi River as part of the settlement. So France is kind of humiliated. 1776, the American Revolution, the French go there and help the Americans to throw off the reign of the British, and so America becomes independent with French support. And then in 1790, this little area, this little island, which is actually now two territories, Haiti, firstly previously called Hispaniola because the Spanish were first in charge, then the French took over. This island, this area of Haiti, was the most profitable colony of France because there they grew sugar in abundance, absolute abundance. And also there they grew coffee. And they actually the French imported 800,000 slaves from Africa to man these farms. And they're all there in great poverty. And the French who owned the farms were making zillions. And ultimately what happened was the slaves decided, there's enough of us, we will revolt. And so they started to throw off the French rule. This, of course, affected the trade and the income of France, so much so that Napoleon says, we've got to do something about that because that's our best territory. That's where we're making most of our money in trade by selling off these commodities. And so Napoleon comes to power in a coup in France in 1799, and he sees a great Western French Empire. Visions of grandeur, delusions of grandeur. Napoleon had them all the way. What actually happens is that Napoleon overcomes Spain. Spain is now at his mercy because his armies have come into Spain. He's changed the overall constitution of Spain, and he says to Spain, "You've got to return Louisiana because we need that port. We need the produce from that port. And we need all our ships to go and bring trade back from Haiti. It wasn't called Haiti then, Hispaniola, and bring everything back from the centre of America. And that's how we're going to rebuild our empire in France." So he does a deal with Spain. Spain really hasn't got any choice, and Spain gives back Louisiana to France secretly. Then in 1802, Napoleon sends an army down to Haiti to try and re-establish control over Haiti, where the slaves have revolted, but that army is absolutely decimated. And so Napoleon's wondering what's he going to do. Mainly the soldiers were killed by yellow fever in that area. So Napoleon can't get back control. What's he going to do? So France and Spain and England saw control of Hispaniola as the key to keeping the trade with the Mississippi and all that West Indies area. So Napoleon's wondering now, what am I going to do? My army can't get control back. My real target actually is England. My real target is England. I want to take control of England. He just couldn't stand the British. And he wanted control of that area. He's decided that it's too hard to have this territory over there in the middle of America, too hard to try and take back control of Haiti. There are a lot of riches in Britain, and after all, I want the British to be humiliated. The French were keen on humiliating Britain and overcoming Britain because Britain was the competitive power. So Napoleon had envisaged this great Western French Empire in the New World. Haiti was going to be the centre of it. It would gain wealth from Mississippi trade, but the slaves, as we said, have really taken over. And Napoleon is starting to think, that's too hard. I can take Britain. That's what I really want to do. So that whole territory there is going to be used now for Napoleon to try and invade England. All right, that's his great plan. What happened was that whole territory was going to be put up for sale.
1762. In the aftermath of the French and Indian War, France loses the Louisiana Territory to Spain. When Spain returns the land to France in an 1801 treaty, Americans worry about what the aggressive Napoleon Bonaparte might do with it. In response, President Thomas Jefferson orders U.S. Minister Robert Livingston to negotiate the purchase of the strategic port of New Orleans from the French. When France offers to sell the entire Louisiana Territory instead, Jefferson moves swiftly to close the deal. On May 2, 1803, the United States signs a treaty with France, acquiring the Louisiana Territory for $15 million. The land deal doubles the size of the United States, adding 828 million square miles to its territory. At a cost of less than 3 cents per acre, the Louisiana Purchase becomes one of Thomas Jefferson's most notable achievements as President of the United States.
Absolutely amazing. The word got out that New Orleans was for sale. And so the President, Thomas Jefferson, sends his ambassador and others over to negotiate the purchase of this port of New Orleans, which was extremely important to the American country, the United States as they were at that point in time. And so they thought, well, we'll go over there and it'll be $2 million. During the negotiations, Napoleon whispers to Talleyrand, sell the lot. So The price was $15 million. Now, Americans didn't have $15 million. That was when $1 million was $1 million. Do we remember the days? Well, it doesn't seem that long ago, but $15 million was an awful lot of money back then, and the American people didn't have $15 million. Where were they going to get the money from? England. They borrowed it from English banks, not knowing what Napoleon was going to do with that money. So they've given him, he's almost broke, Napoleon now. They've given him $15 million for land that he didn't want anyway, a port that he no longer could use. But of course the Americans saw it was very, very valuable to them. 3 cents an acre. Incredible, isn't it? You know? But actually that's not a lot of money in a sense, because today it's equivalent to less than $500 million if you take inflation along the way. And do you know there's a house for sale, I think it's still for sale in Sydney Harbour at the present time, for $200 million, just a house on the waterfront in Sydney Harbour. So $400 million is not much for all of that territory. But Napoleon wanted the money quickly. He had a reason. So God's working behind the scenes here, brothers and sisters and young people. God is working behind the scenes with these people, with their manipulation. They think they're doing extremely well, and they've got tremendous ideas as to what they're going to do, but God's in charge. God's in charge. Anyway, what he does at this point in time is God says, okay, it's fine. Give Napoleon the money. I've got a reason to give him the money. He doesn't know what the reason is, but I've got a reason to give him the money. So $15 million they get from the British banks. What's he going to do? Well, he's started to build a fleet of barges to cross over the channel with his Grande Armée, as it was called, the Grande Armée of 200,000 men. He was going to invade England. And he needed that money to build the ships, the barges, to transport his men across the channel. So he's building all these ships and barges to carry his fleet across the channel, 20 miles across the channel from an area which would bring him near Calais and across to Dover at Boulogne-sur-Mer, Boulogne-on-the-Sea. In 1803, he's got these $15 million. He sold Louisiana, called the Louisiana Purchase. Used the money to fund this army to invade England. But there's a person named Lord Nelson he's going to have to deal with, and he's in the way. And after the Battle of Trafalgar, which we're going to come to in a moment, Napoleon instead uses the funds he got from the sale of the Louisiana Purchase to send his army screaming across Europe to Austerlitz to overthrow the Holy Roman Empire, because that's what God wanted to happen. So this is the timing. And of course, the second vial talks about the sea being filled with blood. Well, Napoleon knew that if he's going to be the master of Europe, he has to overcome Britain. So the plan is build up 2 massive invasion forces, one in the Netherlands and Holland, a bit further north, and the other at Boulogne, and they would cross the channel when the signal was given, and he would use his navy to protect the barges as they went across. So the navy would be on either side of the barges going across, carrying them in to invade England as they ferried them across the English Channel. The problem was that at that point in time, Napoleon's navy was trapped in the Mediterranean. And it was largely Lord Nelson and other great British admirals at that time who had them trapped inside the Mediterranean. So the Mediterranean is full of French boats. Look how narrow the strait is there that they've got to get through, the Straits of Gibraltar. They can't get out. Well, so there's not much chance of them getting out and helping what was going to happen. But Napoleon's aim and objective was, with God's help, I will put an end to the future and the very existence of England. Where would we be today if that had happened? That was his goal, that was his objective, and he never ever deviated from that until the Battle of Trafalgar. So there he is on the shore, he's looking across, he's got 2,000 barges that are built there ready to invade. He just needs his navy to get into position so that they can support the invasion. He comes there to inspect the troops, a painting of the time, of the vast numbers gathered there on the shore, and he's there down at the centre addressing them all, ready to bring about the great invasion. And it almost looks like a political rally there. I suppose it was, in a sense, as Napoleon is getting everybody ready with the great plan that he's got. Now, he's relying on his navy under this Admiral Villeneuve to support the barges going across the channel, but he lost confidence in Villeneuve. Actually, the French navy was able to, at one point, break out of. Actually, Nelson seemed to draw back a little bit to give them an opportunity to come out. So they'd come out of the Mediterranean, and the plan was to feign as if they were going to go to the Caribbean, the French navy go to the Caribbean, and hopefully that would draw Nelson and his ships after them towards the Caribbean. They went most of the way. They turned around when the weather was appropriate and came back towards England with the idea that the British Navy was being drawn away from the Channel towards America. And if Villeneuve had done it quickly enough, he would have come back in time to support the invasion. It didn't happen that way. In fact, they met a small British fleet on the way back, and it damaged some of their ships. So Villeneuve had to go into port in Spain, in the port of Cadiz. And Napoleon, of course, now has said, Villeneuve, you're not successful, I need you, or I'm going to replace you. So Nelson, of course, has come close to the Spanish coast now, and Villeneuve is trapped in the port. What's he going to do? He's going to lose his command of the fleet. Napoleon thinks this is no good. He better do something straight away. So he actually comes out with ships that were not quite 100% fully equipped, but he's going to take on the British fleet anyway to try and save his own office as commander of the fleet.
The Battle of Trafalgar, 1805, was a historic naval engagement during the Napoleonic Wars off the coast of Cape Trafalgar in Spain. The British Royal Navy, commanded by Admiral Lord Nelson, faced a combined fleet of France and Spain, led by Admiral Villeneuve. Despite being outnumbered, Nelson devised a daring tactic known as the Nelson Touch, breaking the enemy's line and engaging them at close quarters. The battle commenced on October 21st and raged for hours. Tragically, Nelson was fatally wounded early on, but continued to inspire his men to victory. The British fleet captured or destroyed 22 of the 33 enemy ships without losing any of their own. The victory at Trafalgar secured British naval supremacy for decades, preventing a French invasion of Britain. This epic clash marked a turning point in the Napoleonic Wars, underscoring the significance of naval power.
There it was. What a turning point it was. So at that point in time, Napoleon, as we said, was ready to become the master of not only mainland Europe, but also of Britain. But it wasn't to be. God had other plans, and he'd raised up a man in Lord Nelson who would do the appropriate job and to stop Napoleon in his tracks at that point and send him across to where God wanted Napoleon to go. So on the 21st of October 1805, there's the Battle of Trafalgar, and Napoleon's dream of invading England is over, and Britannia rules the waves for another 140 years. How did that battle actually take place? This was an audacious new battle strategy, as the video said, called the Nelson Touch. And, of course, back in those days, as in trench warfare that continued right through into the First World War at least, armies would line up against one another, parallel, and just keep on firing. And people would come forward and soldiers would fall, and the next one would come forward until eventually you had some more soldiers on your side and the other side was done for. So it was, battle against battle, line against line. And the same happened with ships. What would happen was that the ships would line up opposite one another and just fire broadsides, boom, 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 boom. Then they turn around and fire from the other side, boom, 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 boom. And that was it. It was just this row of ships against that row of ships. But the Nelson Touch was different. The Nelson Touch, as you can see with the ships on the left there, you can see on the right-hand side the Spanish and French fleets combined. lined up as if it's going to be parallel battle. No. So as the wind was right and the time of day was right, you can see the direction of the wind from the arrow on the top left corner. Nelson turned his ships directly in two lines into the centre of the fleet. So as they would break through the fleet, they could fire from both sides at the opponent's ships. And so he's taken a lot of courage and a lot of bravery, but the ships broke through the line of the opposing ships and were able to surprise them in that way, and so to bring about a defeat in a matter of about 4 hours of battle. Nelson signals to his fleet, a famous signal now: England expects that every man will do his duty. And that was the signal for them all to line as they did, two columns right into the centre of the line of the opposing fleet. And here's Nelson on the Victory, breaking through the fleet, and you can see, if you look closely enough, all the cannonball holes in the sails of the ship. I believe you can go and still see the Victory over in Britain now, and you can see the holes in the sails from the cannons from that Battle of Trafalgar. And so, as I said, it took a lot of courage and bravery, and Nelson himself was in close combat, was hit by a sniper from the mast of one of the French ships. This is the kind of man he was. He had been gradually blinded from an injury in 1794 in his right eye. And there was another battle he was in 1801, and he wasn't the commander of that fleet at that time, and the commander said, no, we need to pull back. You can see the enemy coming, and he put the telescope up to the right eye, said, I can't see anything. So he turned a blind eye. He couldn't see. He said, no, we're going to keep on fighting. And eventually he won. They won that battle. So he kept on fighting, and they won the Battle of Copenhagen. Then he lost his right arm. He's wounded in Tenerife, and they had to take his arm off in 1797. He's still fighting in 1805. He was seasick all the time he went to sea. If the waves were too choppy, he was seasick. But he kept on going because he loved the sea. Here's a man who, without any doubt, God has raised up for this particular purpose. He was a tremendous naval strategist. And so he's fatally shot by this French sniper about 1:15. The battle had started about 12:30. He remained alive on the deck for quite a period of time, still giving directions. He knew he was going to die because the bullet had gone through his spine and lodged in his lung, and he was going to die. About 4:30 he died in the afternoon, and the battle was won by that time. And just before he died, his faithful right-hand man, Hardy, he said, kiss me, Hardy, which he did. And then he said, remember what the sails had said, the signal? Every man's got to do his duty. His last words apparently were, thank God I have done my duty. And God was at work there, brothers and sisters, no shadow of a doubt in this battle. The French flagship Bucentaure is trapped between Victory and Téméraire, and both of those are famous ships in history. And so the battle was very, very close, as you can see. And ultimately, late in the afternoon, one of the bigger French ships, Achilles, exploded and sank, and that signified really the end of the battle. Look at the fact that the angel poured out his blood upon the sea. There were many other sea battles as well. The Battle of the Nile perhaps began it, again with Nelson and French fleet. But in this particular battle, 449 sailors lost by the British, 1,217 wounded. It's a lot in 4 hours, isn't it? And the French and the Spanish suffered 4,408 killed, 2,500 wounded, 20,000 taken prisoner. It was a huge victory, and there was absolutely no shadow of a doubt from here on in that Britain ruled the waves. And so no wonder there's a monument to Lord Nelson, and Trafalgar Square is there, and go and see it all today. And that was a huge turning point where Britain became the lord of the sea, and continued on till, of course, British ships, the ships of Tarshish, brought Jews back to the land. Lots of things as a result of that victory. Now, Napoleon knew the game was up as far as Britain was concerned too. He'd lost America. He'd now lost his vision of Britain. What was he going to do? Well, he was very warlike, as we know, and his concept was that he would rule now mainland Europe. In fact, we know he went on and tried to rule Russia as well. But in this particular case, what he does, he turns his 200,000 men he's had on the shore there, leaves all the barges, they're no use, turn the land army, the Grande Armée, back and march them as quickly as you can towards Austria and Russia, because he knew that they were forming an allegiance and alliance against him at that very point in time. So there was danger unless he moved quickly, and he did. He moved extremely quickly. So within less than 2 months after Trafalgar, he's fought the battle at Austerlitz in 1805, October, of course, for the Battle of Trafalgar. 2nd of December, the Battle of Austerlitz, which was known as his greatest victory. And here, Napoleon is called the son of Austerlitz for interesting reasons. He is called the S-U-N of Austerlitz. The fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, says verse 8, and power was given to him to scorch men with fire, and men were scorched with great heat, and blasphemed the name of God, which hath power over these plagues. But they repented not to give him glory. And the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast. Who's the beast? It's the Holy Roman Empire, isn't it? The beast is the Central Europe Holy Roman military political empire, supportive of the Pope, the image of the beast. Here is the seat of the beast in Vienna, you might say, the capital of the Austrian Holy Roman Empire. And that's where Napoleon is headed now. He put out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain and blasphemed the God of heaven. This is interesting because it's a religious war. Napoleon was dead against the church, the Catholic Church. Most of the people who were with him were the same. They were supportive against the Catholic system and the power that it had over people. So they blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains, their sores, and repented not of their deeds. Why is he called the son of Austerlitz? This is interesting. The battle of the three emperors, the Emperor Napoleon, the Emperor Franz of Austria, the Emperor Alexander of Russia. This is the great battle in 1805. History speaks of the fires of Austerlitz and the sun of Austerlitz. What Napoleon did, it was quite cold. It was, of course, early December, which is pretty cold over there. And there was some snow around and early morning mist and fog. And what Napoleon decided to do was to put up a kind of a smoke screen in front of the enemy in the early morning. And he would move some of his troops to a different location to where the enemy had seen his troops the night before. So under the screen of smoke and early morning fog, he weakened one flank and strengthened another one. Now, what he did was he actually attacked on the weakened flank through the early morning mist. So the enemy would see that there weren't that many that they thought in that particular place. So they would bring most of their troops towards that weakened area, which would leave him with a strong area. Once the sun rose and the mist disappeared and the great orange light that lit up the sky as a result of those fires, that would dazzle the enemy in the position that Napoleon was taking them to, and they wouldn't know that he had moved the strength of his troops towards their weaker area. And so he came around with a tremendous force against a weakened area from the enemy's point of view and took them by great surprise. Then he turned and gave them a full onslaught as the day progressed.
The Battle of Austerlitz, also known as the Battle of the Three Emperors, took place in December 2nd, 1805 as part of the Napoleonic Wars. The emperors involved were Napoleon on one side, Francis, the last Holy Roman Emperor, and his ally Alexander, Tsar of the Russian Empire, on the opposing side. Napoleon lured the Allies into thinking that they were facing a weak army, abandoned terrain, and weakened his right flank, manipulating the Allies into attacking there. This caused the Allies to weaken their center, and that was demolished by the French, who fought on to obtain the greatest victory of the Napoleonic Wars. In the aftermath, Napoleon ordered the construction of the famous Arc de Triomphe to celebrate the French heroes and greatest victories, and Francis dissolved the Holy Roman Empire in 1806.
There we are. So Napoleon brings about the fall of the persecutors of God's saints and people. So after 1,000 years, you know who was the first Holy Roman Emperor? Did I mention before? Remember his name? Charlemagne, 800 AD, right? To 1,006 years, that Holy Roman Empire ruled and suppressed and beat and persecuted any faithful believers down all through Europe, right down through the centuries, and they dominated until Napoleon came along, raised up by God to overthrow the Holy Roman Empire. And so, 1806, Franz abdicates and he dissolves. So this is 8 months after the Battle of Austerlitz. The Holy Roman Empire is totally dissolved and Franz abdicates. And then in 1809, Napoleon annexed the Papal States. He took the Pope prisoner. Pope Pius VII was taken prisoner. And really the whole Roman Catholic system that had been in play for over 1,000 years in the purpose of God is diminished so people can look at their Bibles in peace and discover the original truth. Rediscover the first century faith. And Brother Thomas, of course, was the lead in that. So the angels are in charge, brothers and sisters. They still are in charge today. We'll be talking more about that on Saturday, God willing. And so the French Revolution and these areas of the first 5 vials in particular, through the work of Napoleon in particular, brought about this unheard of political influence of the common people, so that the 3 unclean spirits like frogs can go forth now. The common people rule, democracy rules. It's got a lot of good things, got a lot of very bad things, but that's the state now that the truth was revived in. Greater religious freedoms, tolerance of the Jews, the possibility now for the Jews to look to returning to their homeland, the realignment of all the politics of Europe and Russia and in the Middle East, and the decline of the Turkish power, which began soon after Napoleon's demise. And Napoleon abdicates after Waterloo. God's had his purpose with him, and that purpose now is over. And he's a broken man. His work as appointed by God is finished now. The power of the Pope, the Holy Roman Empire, that's all gone. And the latter-day revival of the truth begins.